Thank you for that. And also, where'd that question go? There's so many people in the chat that I'm trying to find it. And even though I put it on slow motion, it's just
Yeah,
flying through here.
yeah, sure, guys, sure, slow, yeah.
Yeah. So like you can actually pause, you can slow it down where they can only leave a comment every 15 seconds, but with 3,500 people in the chat, all wanting to ask a question from Uncle Cliff here. So,
Right.
you know, it's interesting, Cliff, because the past week I have been actually the past week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, I have been joking around about worshiping the unicorn god. And when it shits glyphosate rainbows, that's like, you know, that's the best part is the glyphosate rainbows that it lets go. And last night I turned on Netflix and a new series that's on Netflix is called Happy. And it's about this detective that ends up not a detective anymore. And he's just kind of going rogue, but he has this near-death experience. And his daughter that he never met because he had a one-night stand, I never even heard about his daughter. Well, his daughter has an imaginary unicorn friend. His daughter gets kidnapped. The unicorn shows up to this guy and he's like, hey, you got to go save your daughter. He's like, I got a daughter. I don't even know what you're talking about. It's so weird that like I'm watching this TV series and all of a sudden, oh, there's you know, it's like it's a good TV show too. It's I think it was originally on USA Today, and this guy's taking out bad guys, and he's going to look for this, you know, creeping sicko that had kidnapped his daughter that he's never even met. But it's just so weird that like I've been talking about, you know, rainbows coming out of unicorns and worshiping unicorns, and all of a sudden I'm watching this TV show last night about a guy that has a imaginary unicorn friend that, you know, shits rainbows. I'm like, dude, you can't make this stuff up. Am I tapping into the universe, or is the universe tapping into me? What's going on, man? We're in the Matrix.
Well, see, so that actually brings up a very serious question, and that is residual effects on abductees. Okay, because imagine your situation if you were an abductee as a young child, and they're just simply reading your mind. They don't do anything to you. They just, you know, you're going to be they're figuring that, 20 years from now, you're going to get married. You're going to produce some kids. They're going to arrange that marriage because they're going to do things in your mind to join you up with a woman whose genetics they want to be joined with yours to produce this next generation of humans. Why they're breeding humans independent of breeding their hybrids and stuff, I don't know. We don't know why they're doing any of this. However, if you read through the abduction literature, you find that there's a whole series of symptoms of abductions that persist following the abduction period. Okay, so, and that is actually synchronicity at that level is one of the things that is continually reported as being highly acute and then fades over time following abductions. So this one guy, or one I think it was a guy. I've read so many of these, I can't tell anymore. Can't remember. But this one report was of a person who judged how recent their abduction experience was based on how frequent the synchronicities were. Actually, I think it was a woman, and at the moment, but she the text was that the person would wake up in the morning, and if there were 3 or 4 synchronicities by noon, they had known that they were abducted the night before, because they have no memory of what goes on. And if they attempt to get a memory, they're one of those many, many, many millions of people that when they go to hypnotherapists or psychiatrists or whatever, and they attempt to do examination of what happened to them, they get headaches, blinding headaches that go away as soon as they stop thinking about it, right? As soon as they stop pursuing that memory, the headache goes away. And so this particular report was this being, this woman or this guy would get up in the morning, and if there was synchronicity, you know, some thought they had, and then 2 seconds later they see it on the newspaper when they get the newspaper from the apartment door, and then 4 seconds later they're looking at an ad or you know, a few minutes later they're looking at an ad in the paper, and it relates to something that's on TV right at that moment. If they have those kind of synchronistic moments appear to them in mass, then they know that there's been a abduction the night before, and the synchronicity fades over the course of several days.
Now, I'm a little bit spooked out about that because I
didn't want to bring it up because
on a daily basis. Cliff, stop it! Help me, Mom. Right. It's okay. I've got Odin right here. Odin's hanging out with me. Deadpool and Thanos. So as long as I stay on Thanos' good side, you know, I don't want to be one of the 50% that he makes disappear. If you've seen the new Avengers,
yeah.
you were gone. See ya.
So but
Wow.
there's the issue about this. There's a number of different symptoms that persist, and you can find reports of these, and it doesn't necessarily prove you're an abductee or that you've been abducted, because these things can occur. And once you're sensitized to synchronicity, the human mind has a tendency to see the patterns that never before were revealed, right? First time you buy a car, all of a sudden you see that car everywhere, right? Whereas you didn't notice it a week before, but now you see everybody that's driving the same vehicle you are. And it's simply because you're sensitized to that shape now, you pick that pattern out more easily, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so these kind of things, though, have led to a vast level of literature, and I'm talking maybe hundreds of volumes. I know of 3 or 4 in Japanese and Chinese about mental exercises, techniques, tools, if you will, to examine and control your own mind. Many of these tools and techniques specifically went to the idea of controlling your mind against intrusions. And these intrusions were the space aliens taking people over. And so in ancient times, when there were flurries of abductions in some of these societies, and they were really consistent throughout Asia, up from about 900 AD, 900 current era, up to about 1600 in the Maunder minimum, although they did dampen off in the 1400s with the Sporer minimum. But these guys developed mental techniques for repelling. And if you look at the abduction phenomena, look how close it resembles possession. Look how close it resembles, getting involved with demons and all of this kind of thing. And the Druids, in fact, used to have concoctions that they made out of mistletoe. And deadly, deadly psychedelic if you don't know what you're doing, right? You got to be real. It's like the blowfish of psychedelics, right? You got to know how to cut that blowfish liver out and all of this kind of stuff, not to kill the person ingesting it. So you got to know what you're doing with this. But the Druids had psychedelics that they used that were out of mistletoe, like I say, that were specifically designed, the experiences were specifically designed to disrupt the possession by these beings, which they always said were sky people, just like the Salish here. And not space people, sky people, big difference. And they pursued those processes for almost 1,000 years. So for 600 plus years, really solid, the Druids were very active in the lands of the Celts and the Picts, and even in Germany, in the Pict population there. And that eventually became the psychedelic tradition of the witches and all of these people that were actively fighting against what they thought of as demonic possession, even though they were not in any way associated with the Catholic Church or any of this. And the Catholic Church later on came along and slaughtered them because it was under the control of the space aliens.
What a great way to hide in plain sight and be like, oh, we're here to protect you. Oh, we're here because we're your savior. We're your salvation. And meanwhile, they're just sucking your soul right out and feeding off like a rechargeable battery oftentimes. It's insane. And at the same time, it makes so much sense that it's scary. It's like one of those things that makes too much sense. And you're like, wait a second, I can't even think about that. Or can I? I can think about it, but a lot of people won't, just because it takes them out of their comfort zone. And then they have to start putting up labels. Oh, you're crazy. You're a conspiracy theorist. I can't believe that. They're there to protect us. Very interesting. And a question from the audience here. Everybody keeps asking this question. And somebody just said, Cliff's best interviews are on Leak Project. Thank you. I'll pay you later for that. They said, I love watching Cliff. So RH negative blood type. Your thoughts?
Okay, so Rh negative blood type is an aberration. All right. It is historically and scientifically should not exist the way it does within our population. The Rh negative may have been a response left, or may have been an indicator that was left over from a side breeding experiment that the aliens took with us. So I can't say if it was the Elohim or the Anunnaki. I don't think it was the bugs, though, okay, because it occurred post-bug intrusion, so to speak, and then seems relatively isolated, even though it's within our population and spreading out. Rh negative is associated with a particular kind of an electrical response, though, and so I find that interesting. that people with Rh negative blood deal with electricity in their body in a slightly different way than non-negative blood, right? And it has some health repercussions, but it also may have mental repercussions in terms of neuropathy and neural controls. So it might have been some other being's response to our species, and thinking to themselves, oh, if we can put this into them, they will be able to be dialed in on our machinery, that kind of a thing. I don't, again, see, we're speculating as to the why, but we do know that it has some very interesting properties relative to blood and neurons that we don't see showing up in the larger general population.
You know, it's interesting also, they have more like the copper amount in their blood around electronics. They, you know, the lights will pop, radios will stop
Well,
working.
we know that it's a interspecies kind of a thing because, you know, without these special hormonal responses, an Rh positive woman cannot bring an Rh negative child to term. In other words, and it's very brutal even when it does occur effectively.
Absolutely. And, you know, those shots that they give mothers with Rh negative blood, oftentimes because of the adjuvants in the shots, it can have bad side effects physically and mentally on the child, and also on the mother. It's unfortunate, but you know, it's like one of those things that you would think that they would use an adjuvant that wouldn't be aluminum or thimerosal based, but that's a whole other podcast. Maybe I wonder also if some of these people that have the Rh negative blood, it seems to be like they're oftentimes more telepathic. They're oftentimes more in tune with certain things. So maybe they were designed at one point,
Correct.
or maybe, you know, they were like the druids or wizards and sorcerers, etc. It's really neat to think about. But another question in the audience here, and I think this is actually one of the things we were going to talk about, was time. It seems like time are they messing with time, man?
Okay, well, we have to separate that. Okay, we have to separate our thinking. We have to be very hard-headed about thinking about time because we so understand so little of it. And so we can say definitively, yes, that everybody that is involved in the abduction and space alien invasion process has had their time affected. Okay, but it might entirely be mental, right? So I don't believe these beings in any way can change the general time, the nature of time itself. There are reports that these beings, that the insects have the ability to run time backwards in these little containers that might look, you know, for all the world like something out of Star Wars with a hologram in it. Okay, and so it's a visual thing, and you look at it running back and forth, and it's not. The reports are that it's not a movie, it's not an image, it's actually the event itself being run back and forth, and you can make it appear inside this device. And so it would be like an encapsulation of a particular point on Earth and the events that happened. Theoretically, at least insofar as is being reported, they have the ability to capture images extra time, out of time, and replay them. But they don't have any ability to change time and put us all back 1,000 years or move time a millisecond even. However, within our brains, they have ultimate control. So here's an issue for you, right? I've got this scar in the back of my ear on this bone. There's this bone behind your ear. Turns out, I didn't know it at the time, to be very associated with one-off abductee implants. So they find, they don't find implants a whole lot in regular abductees. Those abductees that are taken for one purpose or another, for whatever purpose, but are taken for basically just one time, a one-off, do have implants in them. And I had one on the bone in my foot, and I had another one on the bone behind my head. The one in my foot, I didn't even recognize it as an implant, or no one did at the time it was surgically removed. And it was just sent off to pathology and determined to be benign around a foreign substance, a benign adenopathy, lymph gland basically that had formed around an unknown substance, and it was discarded. It wasn't cancerous. I didn't care. I was young. I didn't know what was going on. Many years later, like a decade later, after I had been exposed to some of this stuff and knew about the idea of implants, I noticed that I had for a number of years, and I couldn't say when I got it, this thing that was like small and like the size of a BB right on that bone. And it was very irritating.